Welcome to Lesson 2, where we will be discussing making sense out of suffering. People are hurting. People are suffering. Your neighbor, your friend, your coworker. We have natural disasters, accidents, cancer, sudden infant death syndrome. Many of these things I have witnessed firsthand as an EMT. There is no avoiding it. We will all suffer in some form if we're not already or currently suffering. Yet today, we do not suffer nearly the same obstacles our ancestors went through just 100 years ago. We go through life for the most part without experiencing the physical pain and illnesses they had to go through. No, today we seem to be hurting far more psychologically and emotionally than ever before. Boredom is up, loneliness is up, depression and anxiety is up, and that was before COVID-19. Symptoms of anxiety and depressive disorders have increased significantly this year as compared to the prior year. Much of this has to do with social isolation. We are social creatures, and we suffer in isolation. Also, modern society does not give meaning to suffering except 1,000 ways to avoid it. Yet, suffering cannot be avoided. We must revisit Aristotle and what he meant by happiness. Remember, the purpose of life was to be happy? It is what we all desire. However, happiness for him and other pre-modern thinkers was an objective state, not merely a subjective feeling. By this definition, Socrates, unjustly condemned to die, is happy. Viktor Frankl, in a concentration camp, is happy. Hitler, exulting conquest over Europe, is not happy. The issue here is more than semantics of a simple word. It has everything to do with how we define our lives, what gives our lives meaning and aids us towards a more resilient life. For many, it is feeling good. For the ancients, it was being good. Feeling good is not compatible with suffering, but being good is. In fact, for many of the ancient philosophers, it was impossible to be good or to be wise without suffering. Have you ever learned or become better from things you have suffered or the trials you have overcome? Is this objective happiness not better than our subjective happiness? What is the good of the body? Health, pleasure, freedom from suffering. But what is the good of the person? Wisdom, integrity, character. Now let's speak of Viktor Frankl. Frankl was a famous psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. He was the founder of logotherapy, which literally means healing through meaning. Author of many books, he is mostly known for his best-selling book, Man's Search for Meaning, which was based on his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps. He noted that there was not much to anything people could do to keep from the gas chambers. Many men would shave with broken glass to look young so not to look old and useless. But even that didn't guarantee safety from the gas chambers. He noted the people who lost the will to survive also lost meaning in their lives. They may have been physically fit, but not mentally fit. In fact, as their mental faculties left their bodies, soon their bodies would catch up. Some prisoners rose above their suffering to help serve other prisoners with compassion and to make the best of their circumstances. This service to others gave them something to live for, something beyond themselves. It gave them purpose and meaning. Now I must note that this does not mean those who are less vulnerable cannot find purpose in their pain and suffering. It is all too often we come to this conclusion. A person is not any less dignified or equal to another person based on what they can and cannot do. And in many ways, those who suffer are blessed and closer to God. That's why Fulton Sheen would hand bedridden patients a list of names to pray for. He knew they were close to God, and the prayer of the righteous person availeth much. So even if those who suffered worse in those horrible camps, if they realized they played a vital role, and those who helped them practically sanctifying them, it would have gone a long way towards their own resilience. So the first takeaway from this book by Viktor Frankl is that he noted, "He who has a why can bear any how." A person who's found a purpose in life can overcome any obstacle in their path. But again, this all depends on how you define happiness. Secondly, he noted that forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you respond to that situation. You cannot always control what happens to you in your life, but you can always control what you feel and do about what happens to you. The last great takeaway from his book is that suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment we find meaning in it. I would also argue suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment you become better because of it. Suffering has not corrupted you, but made you a better person. You have flourished despite your trials. That is the accomplished person. You have become objectively happy, which is more enduring, pervasive, and deep. Frankl says, when we are no longer capable of changing the situation, we are called to change ourselves. No one can take your capacity and your will to become a better person. They can hurt your body, they can hurt you emotionally, but they cannot change who you are as a person. You have control of that. You can harm my body, but not me, the person. I am not just my body. You can tempt me to bitterness, but I don't have to succumb. The only person that can do real harm to me is me. Fulton Sheen has a great quote that I think is applicable. It is on evil and suffering. He says, "We are not going to give here a complete explanation of evil, and a complete explanation of evil cannot be given here below. We will only just give certain indications of why it is possible. Let us begin with the question why God made this kind of world. You must realize that this is not the only kind of world that God could have made. He might have made 10,000 other kinds of worlds in which there would be no pain, no struggle, and no sacrifice. But this is the best possible kind of world that God could have made for the purpose that he had in mind." Now that brings us to another question. What purpose did God have in mind in making this kind of world? The answer is that God intended to build a moral universe. He will from all eternity build a stage on which characters would emerge. He might have made our world without morality, without virtue, without character. He might have made a world in which each and every one of us would have sprouted goodness with the same necessity, for example, that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But he chose not to make that kind of world. No, to make a world in which we would be good as fire is hot or as ice is cold. He willed to make a moral universe in order that by the right use of the gift of freedom, characters might emerge. What does God care for things piled into infinity of space, even though they may be diamonds, or if all the orbits of heaven shall be so many jewels glittering as the sun? What would their eternal but undisturbed balance mean to him in comparison to the single character which could take hold of his life and weave saintliness and holiness? The choice before God in creating the world, therefore, lay between creating a purely mechanical universe, people by mere automation machines, or creating a spiritual universe in which there would be a choice of good and evil. All right granted, then, that God chose to make a moral universe in which there would be character. What was the condition of such a universe? He had to make us free. That is to say, he had to endow us with the power to say yes and no. We be captains of our own fate and destiny. And morality implies responsibility and beauty, but these can exist only on condition of freedom. Stones have no morals because they are not free. We do not condemn ice because it is melted by heat. Praise and blame can be bestowed only on those who are masters of their own will. It is only because you, for example, have the possibility of saying no that there's so much charm in your character when you say yes. Take the quality of freedom away from anyone, and it is no more possible for him to be virtuous than it is for a blade of grass which he treads beneath his feet. That's end quote. Can you see how knowing the freedom to develop character and virtue in this kind of life is much more meaningful than if we were to sprout goodness as natural as the sun rises? Can you see on the flip side how the suffering aids us to a deeper, more profound happiness and fulfillment? Can you see why there might be anxiety and depression amongst the world that allows such freedom? It is part of the human condition, but so is resiliency. Your reading this week will be the last we hear from Robert Spitzer. Here we will build on last week's lesson on how suffering from blindness gave him the freedom to overcome the far greater suffering of living beneath himself and avoiding a noble purpose in life. I'll see you in lesson 3.